At 7 that night, I saw my daughter kneeling in the rain, barely breathing. The shopping bag with her new maternity dress lay soaked beside her in a puddle. Elizabeth was 8 months pregnant, shivering violently in the downpour, her face deathly pale. Inside the house, I heard her husband Thomas and his family laughing over wine. My heart stopped. Then rage flooded through me. I lifted Elizabeth to her feet, steadied her trembling body against mine, kicked the front door open with strength I didn't know I possessed, and faced the stunned room with 5 words they would never forget. I'm Dulce Montgomery, 67 years old, a retired elementary school teacher and widow of 12 years. My late husband Frank was the love of my life, leaving me with wonderful memories, financial stability, and our only daughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was always the light of our lives. As a child, she had Frank's gentle blue eyes and my determined spirit. She grew into a compassionate, bright young woman who followed in my footsteps to become a kindergarten teacher. Watching her with those children, their faces lighting up when she entered the room, I knew she'd make an exceptional mother someday. When Elizabeth met Thomas Jackson 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser for her school, I was initially pleased. He was handsome in that polished way successful men often are, with perfectly tailored suits and the confident smile of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. At 36, he was 4 years older than Elizabeth and established as one of the most successful real estate developers in our region. "Mom, he's different from anyone I've ever met," Elizabeth told me, her eyes sparkling during our weekly Sunday brunch. "He listens when I talk about my students. Really listens." Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, and Thomas showering Elizabeth with gifts. I remembered thinking it was moving too quickly. But Elizabeth seemed happier than I'd seen her since Frank passed away. Who was I to question that? There were signs, looking back, that I dismissed. The way Thomas checked his watch repeatedly when Elizabeth was talking about her classroom. How he subtly corrected her table manners at dinner with us. His comments about her adorable career, as though teaching children was a cute hobby rather than her passion. He's just old-fashioned, I told myself, raised differently. When Thomas proposed after just 6 months, I voiced gentle concerns about the speed. Elizabeth assured me they'd discussed everything: important children, finances, where to live. What I didn't realize then was that these weren't discussions but declarations, with Thomas setting the terms of their future. The wedding was lavish, clearly designed to impress Thomas's family and business associates. I met his parents, Margaret and William Jackson, who owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. They were polite but distant, assessing Elizabeth like a business acquisition. Thomas's younger sister Caroline stood apart from the family, quieter, watching rather than participating. "Your daughter is quite pretty," Margaret told me during the reception, her voice lowered conspiratorially. "Thomas always did have excellent taste. Of course, she'll need some polishing for our social circle." I should have responded, should have defended my daughter, but I smiled tightly and excused myself instead. That moment haunts me still. After the wedding, I noticed Elizabeth calling less frequently. Our Sunday brunches became monthly, then occasional. She stopped mentioning her friends from school. When I asked about her applying for the lead teacher position she'd been excited about, she explained that Thomas thought it best if she focused on being a wife for now. "We're trying for a baby, Mom," she told me, her voice bright but somehow rehearsed. "Thomas thinks children need a full-time mother, and honestly, he makes more than enough for both of us." When Elizabeth announced her pregnancy 8 months ago, I was overjoyed at becoming a grandmother but troubled by subtle changes in my daughter. She'd lost weight despite the pregnancy, her clothes now exclusively high-end brands that Thomas approved. She checked her phone constantly when we were together, answering his texts immediately. One afternoon while shopping for nursery furniture, Elizabeth's credit card was declined. Her face flushed with embarrassment. "It's nothing," she insisted, pulling out another card. Thomas must have forgotten to transfer the monthly allowance. "Allowance?" I echoed, the word sitting uncomfortably between us. "It's just how we manage things," she explained quickly. "Thomas handles all our finances. It's better that way since I've never been good with money. This wasn't true. Elizabeth had always been responsible, saving diligently from her teaching salary, budgeting carefully for the future. Frank and I had raised her to be financially independent. Later that same day, I watched her count the items in her shopping cart anxiously, returning a baby monitor she'd selected because Thomas might think it's too expensive. When her phone rang, she stepped away to answer, returning with news that Thomas wanted her home to meet an unexpected business associate for dinner. "I have to go right now," she said, checking her watch nervously. "Thomas texted the menu he wants me to prepare." As I hugged her goodbye, I felt her bones through her expensive maternity blouse. Something was deeply wrong, but every time I tried to broach the subject, Elizabeth deflected or changed the topic. The last red flag came just 3 weeks ago when Elizabeth called, actually excited about something for the first time in months. "Thomas is going to Chicago for a big development meeting," she said, her voice lighter than I'd heard in ages. 3 whole days to myself. "Maybe we could have lunch? If you're not busy?" The fact that my daughter needed to wait until her husband was out of town to have lunch with her, mother turned that knot of worry in my stomach into a hard, cold stone. The morning that would change everything started ordinarily enough. I was deadheading roses in my garden when Elizabeth called, her voice animated in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Mom, are you free today? Thomas left for Chicago this morning, and there's a big sale at Expectant Elegance. I need something decent to wear to the baby shower his office is throwing next week." I agreed immediately, delighted by the prospect of spending time with my daughter without the constant interruption of Thomas's texts and calls. Elizabeth was waiting outside the maternity boutique when I arrived, wearing a simple sundress that stretched uncomfortably across her 8-month belly. Despite the warm June day, she had a light cardigan pulled around her shoulders. "I've been looking forward to this," she admitted as we browsed the sale racks. "I haven't been shopping without Thomas or his mother in ages." The store clerk, a motherly woman named Patricia, helped Elizabeth select several outfits for the changing room. I waited outside, sorting through tiny onesies and imagining my grandchild wearing them. Elizabeth emerged in a navy blue dress with small white polka dots. The empire waist flattered her pregnant figure, and the color brought out the blue of her eyes. For a moment, I glimpsed my daughter as she used to be confident, radiant. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I said, throat tightening unexpectedly. "It feels amazing," Elizabeth whispered, smoothing the fabric over her belly. "Like me, but prettier." The price tag showed $79, marked down from over $100. Elizabeth checked it and hesitated. "Is it too much? Maybe I should just wear the black one I already have." "The black one you've worn 3 times already?" "Absolutely not. This is perfect for your shower, and it's on sale." I reached for my purse. "Let me get it for you." "No," Elizabeth said firmly, surprising me. "I want to buy it myself. I have some money saved." Her eyes darted away as she said this, and I realized she'd been squirreling away small amounts from her allowance, a small rebellion against Thomas's financial control. After purchasing the dress, we had lunch at a small cafe nearby. Elizabeth ordered a proper meal for the first time in months, and as we talked about the baby, her old animation returned. She asked about my garden, my book club friends, all the small details of my life she'd once been an active part of. Just as our desserts arrived, Elizabeth's phone chimed. Her face fell as she read the message. "Everything okay?" I asked, watching her thumbs flying across the screen. "It's Thomas. His meeting ended early. He's already on his way back." Her voice had flattened, the joy draining visibly from her expression. "His parents decided to drive in for dinner tonight. They were supposed to come next weekend, but his mother changed her mind." Another text arrived, then another. Elizabeth's responses grew shorter, her movements increasingly agitated. "I need to go," she said, abandoning her half-eaten chocolate cake. "Margaret likes the house a certain way. There's so much to do before they arrive." "I can help," I offered, reaching for her hand. "No," Elizabeth said too quickly. "Thomas prefers it's just better if I handle it." She glanced at her shopping bag. "I probably shouldn't have spent the money on the dress. It was selfish with the baby coming." I walked Elizabeth to her car, uneasy about her sudden change in demeanor. As she drove away, I noticed her hand already at her throat, unconsciously rubbing the spot where tension always gathered when Thomas was around. The rest of my afternoon passed slowly. Dark clouds gathered as a summer storm approached, matching my growing sense of foreboding. By 6:30, thunder was rumbling in the distance, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I called Elizabeth twice, but the calls went straight to voicemail. Perhaps she was busy with dinner preparations. Still, my unease persisted until I made a decision. I would drive by, maybe drop off some fresh flowers from my garden as an excuse. If everything was fine, I'd leave quickly. If not, I didn't allow myself to complete that thought as I grabbed my raincoat and car keys, heading into the gathering storm. The rain started in earnest as I drove toward Elizabeth and Thomas's upscale neighborhood. Lightning flashed across the darkening sky, and my windshield wipers struggled against the downpour. Twice, I nearly turned around, telling myself I was overreacting. Elizabeth was a grown woman with her own life, yet something pulled me forward, mother's intuition, or perhaps the accumulation of 1,000 small concerns I'd been dismissing for too long. Their house came into view, a large colonial with perfect landscaping at the end of a cul-de-sac. All the lights were on, and 3 cars sat in the driveway: Thomas's sleek black Mercedes, his father's matching vehicle, and a red sports car belonging to his sister Caroline. I slowed, not wanting to intrude on their family dinner. That's when I saw her. In the side garden, barely visible through the sheeting rain, a figure knelt on the ground. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a garden statue. Then lightning illuminated the scene, and my heart stopped. Elizabeth was on her knees in the pouring rain, head bowed, arms wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly. She wore only a light dress, the same one she'd had on earlier, now plastered to her body by the deluge. Beside her on the ground lay the shopping bag from Expectant Elegance, soaking in a puddle. I slammed on the brakes, pulled into the driveway, and was out of my car in seconds, rain drenching me instantly. Running to Elizabeth, I could see she was shaking violently, her lips blue with cold. "Elizabeth!" I cried, kneeling beside her. "What's happening? Why are you out here?" Her face lifted slowly, as though it took all her strength. Her eyes were unfocused, skin deathly pale. "Mom," she whispered, voice barely audible above the storm. "I didn't know you were coming. What's going on? How long have you been out here?" I demanded, already slipping off my raincoat to wrap around her shoulders. "Almost an hour," she managed, teeth chattering. Thomas said, "Punishment. Wasteful spending." Rage like I'd never known surged through me. Through the bay window of the dining room, I could see Thomas and his family, his parents and sister, seated around the table, wine glasses in hand, laughing as though they weren't actively torturing a pregnant woman just yards away. "He's punishing you? By making you kneel in a thunderstorm? While you're 8 months pregnant?" Elizabeth nodded weakly. "The dress. I wasn't supposed to. He checks all expenses. Can you stand?" I asked, gently helping her to her feet. She swayed dangerously, leaning heavily against me. "I'm so cold, Mom," she whispered. "The baby hasn't moved in a while." Cold fear washed over me. Hypothermia in pregnancy could be life-threatening for both mother and child. Elizabeth's skin was ice to the touch despite the warm June evening. "Let's get you inside right now," I said, half carrying her toward the front door. "No," Elizabeth protested weakly. "Thomas said I have to stay until he says I can come in. He'll be angrier if I disobey." "I don't give a damn what Thomas said," I replied, steel entering my voice. "This is dangerous for you and the baby." As we moved slowly toward the house, Elizabeth began to tell me things she'd been hiding for months. How Thomas had gradually taken control of every aspect of her life, from their finances, to her clothing choices, to which rooms of the house she was allowed to use when his parents visited. "I've been trying to save," she confessed, stumbling alongside me. "A little bit here and there, for the baby, and for me. I thought maybe I could leave, Find an apartment. Her voice broke, but he found out somehow. He checked my personal account this afternoon. There was only $600, but he was so angry. You were going to leave him? I asked, surprised despite everything. Elizabeth nodded. I was planning, gathering documents. But he's changed everything. Took my name off our joint accounts, the house deed, everything. The money I saved was all I had. Now it's gone too. He transferred it to his account right in front of me. We reached the front door, Elizabeth leaning more heavily against me with each step. I could feel her shaking violently beneath my arm. Maternal instinct and fury propelled me forward. With Elizabeth balanced against my side, I reached for the door handle, but stopped at her next words. There's more, Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. Last month, when I dropped a glass and cut my hand, it wasn't an accident. Thomas pushed me because I'd forgotten to record a check in the ledger. She pulled back the soaked sleeve of her dress to reveal a healing bruise around her wrist. It's been getting worse since the pregnancy. Something in me broke open and reformed in that moment, harder, more determined than before. I'd spent too long looking away, making excuses, allowing my daughter to suffer under the guise of respecting her marriage. No more. I helped Elizabeth onto the covered porch, letting her lean against a column while I prepared to confront the monster inside. Through the leaded glass windows, I could see Thomas raising his wine glass and some toast, his parents smiling indulgently. Only Caroline, his sister, seemed uncomfortable, her eyes darting occasionally toward the windows. It's going to be okay, I told Elizabeth, wiping rain from her face. I'm here now. With a deep breath, I raised my foot and kicked the front door with all my strength. It flew open, banging against the wall inside. The door crashed open with a sound like a thunderclap, momentarily silencing the conversation inside. 4 heads swiveled toward us: Thomas, his parents William and Margaret, and his sister Caroline. Their expressions shifted from shock to confusion as they took in the sight of Elizabeth and me dripping on their marble entryway. This ends right here tonight, I said, my voice low but carrying through the sudden silence. Thomas recovered first, rising smoothly from his chair. At 36, he was handsome in the conventional way of privileged men, tall, fit, with carefully styled dark hair, and the easy confidence that comes from never being denied anything important. Dulce, he said pleasantly, as though finding his pregnant wife hypothermic wasn't concerning. This is unexpected. We're in the middle of dinner, while your wife kneels in a thunderstorm? For buying a maternity dress? I helped Elizabeth further into the house, leaving puddles on the pristine floor. Thomas's expression hardened. I think you've misunderstood a private matter between my wife and me. Elizabeth is being disciplined for financial irresponsibility. Disciplined? I echoed, unable to believe he'd use such a word. She's not a child. She's your pregnant wife, and you've left her in dangerous conditions. Margaret Jackson set down her wine glass with a sharp click. Thomas has always been particular about household management, she said, her voice cultured and cold. Elizabeth agreed to certain standards when she married into our family. I stared at this woman who could so callously dismiss her daughter-in-law's suffering. Elizabeth shivered violently beside me, still protecting her belly with both arms. She needs dry clothes and medical attention, I said. The baby hasn't been moving. Don't be dramatic, Thomas replied, walking toward us with measured steps. Elizabeth knows she's welcome inside once she's had time to reflect on her choices. Running to her mother instead of accepting consequences hardly shows growth. Consequences? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. For spending her own money on a dress for a baby shower your office is throwing? Her money? Thomas laughed, the sound chilling. There's no her money in this marriage. I earn, I allocate. Elizabeth agreed to this arrangement. Under duress and manipulation, I shot back. No one agrees to abuse. The word hung in the air between us. Thomas's father, William, stood now. Tall and imposing like his son, but with gray at his temples and cold eyes. You're throwing around dangerous accusations, Mrs. Montgomery, he said. Our family has a reputation in this community. Your reputation? I laughed bitterly. You're sitting here enjoying wine while a pregnant woman kneels in the rain. What reputation is that exactly? I turned to help Elizabeth toward the stairs, intent on getting her warm and dry. But Thomas stepped into our path. This is my house, he said, voice dropping to something dangerous. And Elizabeth is my wife. I decide what happens here. Not anymore, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Elizabeth is coming with me tonight. Thomas's mask of civility slipped further. She's not going anywhere. Elizabeth, tell your mother you're staying home where you belong. Elizabeth, who had been silent until now, lifted her head slightly. I want to leave, Thomas, she whispered. Please, just let me go. After everything I've given you? Thomas's voice rose. The lifestyle, the house, the clothes. You'd be nothing without me. A kindergarten teacher living in some apartment. Better that than this, Elizabeth replied, her voice gaining strength. I want a divorce. Thomas moved so suddenly I barely had time to react, grabbing Elizabeth's arm roughly. You're not taking my child anywhere. I inserted myself between them, surprising everyone with my quickness. Don't touch her again. The room crackled with tension. Margaret sipped her wine, watching the scene unfold with detached interest. William stood behind his son, a united front of male authority. It was Caroline, silent until now, who unexpectedly spoke. Thomas, stop it. Her voice was quiet but firm. Look at her. She's freezing and pregnant. This isn't right. Thomas rounded on his sister. Stay out of this, Caroline. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Caroline stood, setting her napkin aside deliberately. It looks exactly like what Dad used to do to Mom when we were kids. Remember those discipline sessions in the garage? When she bought something without permission? The room went deathly quiet. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she set down her glass, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. That's completely different, William blustered, but his confidence seemed suddenly brittle. Is it? Caroline challenged, looking directly at her father. Mom kneeling on the concrete floor for hours? Coming back with bruises she blamed on clumsiness? The way you controlled every penny, every decision? That's enough. William slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. No, it's not nearly enough, Caroline continued, years of suppressed truth flooding out. I've watched Thomas recreate your exact playbook with Elizabeth. The isolation, the financial control, the punishments. I've been silent too long. Thomas's face contorted with rage. You have no idea what you're talking about. Elizabeth is reckless, emotional. She needs structure. She needs safety, I countered, and basic human dignity. This is rich coming from you. Thomas turned on me, his composure fracturing completely. Where were you all these months? So content to believe everything was perfect in your daughter's life that you never looked deeper. His words hit their mark. I had ignored signs, made excuses, told myself not to interfere. That guilt would be addressed later, but now Elizabeth needed me to be strong. You're right that I failed her, I admitted, surprising him. But I'm here now, and she's leaving with me tonight. Thomas moved closer, using his height to intimidate. You have no legal right to take her anywhere. This is my house, my wife, my child. Your property, you mean? I said evenly, refusing to be cowed. That's how you see them, isn't it? Things you own. Thomas's control snapped entirely. Get out of my house before I have you removed, he hissed, face inches from mine. Elizabeth stays. End of discussion. Before I could respond, Elizabeth made a small, pained sound beside me. We all turned to see her clutching her stomach, face contorted. The baby, she gasped, legs buckling. Something's wrong. I caught her as she collapsed, lowering her gently to the floor. The room erupted in chaos, Caroline rushing forward to help, Margaret gasping theatrically, William and Thomas arguing about what to do. Call an ambulance, I shouted over them. Now! Thomas pulled out his phone, suddenly the concerned husband. My wife's pregnant and something's wrong. he said smoothly into the phone, giving their address. Then, covering the mouthpiece, he added for our benefit, "She was outside in the rain. She's been emotionally unstable lately," creating his narrative already, establishing Elizabeth as the irrational one. Caroline knelt beside us, helping me position Elizabeth more comfortably. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to her sister-in-law. "I've wanted to say something for so long." Elizabeth gripped Caroline's hand weakly. "Thank you for speaking up," she managed through pain. As we waited for the ambulance, Thomas transformed completely. Kneeling beside Elizabeth with convincing concern, stroking her hair, murmuring reassurances. The perfect worried husband for when the paramedics arrived. I caught his eye over Elizabeth's prone form. "This act doesn't fool me," I said quietly. "And it won't fool the doctors when they see her condition." Thomas smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Who do you think they'll believe? The respected developer who's friends with half the hospital board, or an interfering mother-in-law creating family drama?" His confidence chilled me, but I held his gaze steadily. "We'll see about that." The wail of approaching sirens cut through the tension. In the flashing lights of the ambulance, I made a silent promise to my daughter and unborn grandchild. This was indeed ending tonight, regardless of what it took. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency lights, hospital corridors, and medical terminology. The paramedics arrived quickly, their professionalism cutting through the family drama as they assessed Elizabeth and prepared her for transport. Blood pressure 160/95. One reported, "Concern evident. Possible preeclampsia. Patient showing signs of hypothermia." Thomas attempted to take control immediately. "I'll ride with my wife," he announced, already reaching for his jacket. I stepped forward. "No, I'm going with her." When he began to protest, I added firmly, "She's asking for me, not you." It was true. Elizabeth had gripped my hand, whispering, "Don't leave me," as the paramedics worked. The lead paramedic, a woman with kind eyes and no patience for family squabbles, made the decision for us. One person only, and patient has requested her mother. "Sir, you can follow in your vehicle." I climbed into the ambulance, leaving Thomas fuming on the doorstep with his family. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Caroline stepping away from her parents, pulling out her phone with determined purpose. The ride to Regional Medical Center was tense, with Elizabeth drifting in and out of awareness as the paramedics worked to stabilize her. I held her cold hand, murmuring reassurances while internally cataloging everything I needed to do. This wasn't just about getting Elizabeth through tonight, it was about ensuring she and her baby would be safe tomorrow, next week, next year. "Mom," Elizabeth whispered during a lucid moment. "I'm sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I insisted, squeezing her hand. "I should have told you sooner," she continued, tears mixing with the remaining raindrops on her face. "I was so ashamed. I kept thinking I could fix it, make him happy somehow." "Listen to me," I said firmly. "None of this is your fault. But right now, you need to focus on yourself and the baby. Everything else can wait." At the hospital, Elizabeth was whisked away for immediate evaluation while I completed paperwork. Providing her medical history and insurance information I thankfully still knew. I had just finished when Thomas strode in, his parents trailing behind him, all three looking like they were attending a business meeting rather than a family emergency. "Where is she?" Thomas demanded, ignoring me to address the reception nurse directly. "Mrs. Jackson is being evaluated by the obstetrics team," she replied professionally. "Dr. Winters will update the family shortly." "I'm her husband," Thomas stated unnecessarily. "I need to see her now." "I'm afraid that's not possible during evaluation, sir. If you'd like to wait with family—" "This is ridiculous," he interrupted. "Do you know who I am? The Jackson wing of this hospital exists because of my family's donations." I watched this display silently, noting how quickly Thomas resorted to intimidation when challenged. The nurse, to her credit, remained unfazed. "I'm well aware of the Jackson family's contributions, Mr. Jackson. However, medical protocol applies equally to all patients. Dr. Winters will be out shortly." Thomas turned away in frustration, finally acknowledging my presence with a cold stare. "I suppose you're pleased with yourself," he said quietly. "Creating this spectacle. The only spectacle was you forcing your pregnant wife to kneel in a thunderstorm," I replied evenly. "Everything that follows is the natural consequence of your actions." Before he could respond, Dr. Winters appeared, a tall woman with prematurely gray hair and the direct manner of someone who had no time for nonsense. "Family of Elizabeth Jackson?" she asked, glancing between us. "I'm her husband." Thomas stepped forward immediately, extending his hand. "Thomas Jackson. I'm her mother," I added, moving to stand beside him. The doctor nodded. "Mrs. Jackson is stable, but I'm concerned about several issues. She's showing signs of preeclampsia, dangerously high blood pressure in pregnancy. We're also treating her for mild hypothermia and dehydration." "Will the baby be okay?" I asked, voicing the question most pressing to me. "We're monitoring fetal heart tones closely. They're stable, but not as reactive as I'd like. We'll continue observation overnight." "Can someone explain how a heavily pregnant woman ended up with hypothermia on a June evening?" There was a moment of tense silence. Thomas opened his mouth, undoubtedly to spin some story, but I spoke first. "My daughter was forced to kneel outside in the thunderstorm for over an hour as punishment by her husband," I stated baldly, meeting the doctor's eyes. "That's absurd," Thomas scoffed. "Elizabeth has been emotionally unstable throughout this pregnancy. She went outside during our dinner and refused to come in despite our pleas." Dr. Winter's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. "I see. Well, Mrs. Jackson has given her account as well. We've documented her condition thoroughly, including the bruising on her wrists and arms." Thomas paled slightly but recovered quickly. "My wife is somewhat clumsy, especially with the pregnancy affecting her balance." "Indeed." The doctor's tone made it clear she didn't believe him. "In cases like this, hospital policy requires a consultation with our social services team. They'll be speaking with Mrs. Jackson tomorrow." "That's really not necessary," Thomas insisted. "This has all been a misunderstanding blown out of proportion." "Nevertheless, it's our protocol," Dr. Winters replied firmly. "Now, Mrs. Jackson has requested to see her mother privately. Mr. Jackson, you can visit afterward." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly, aware of maintaining appearances. As Dr. Winters led me toward Elizabeth's room, I felt Thomas's eyes boring into my back, calculating his next move. Elizabeth lay in the hospital bed, monitoring equipment beeping steadily around her. Her face was still pale, but some color had returned to her lips. She'd been changed into a hospital gown, her soaked clothes presumably bagged somewhere as evidence. "Mom," she said as I entered, reaching for my hand. "The baby's okay. They found the heartbeat." "Thank God," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "You're both going to be fine." Dr. Winters checked Elizabeth's monitors. "Your blood pressure is still elevated. We're giving you medication to bring it down gradually. Try to rest, and we'll keep monitoring you and the baby overnight." When the doctor left, Elizabeth gripped my hand tightly. "Thomas is here, isn't he?" "Yes, but he can't see you unless you want him to." "I don't," she said immediately. "Mom, I need to tell you everything before he comes in and tries to twist things around." For the next hour, as monitoring equipment beeped rhythmically around us, Elizabeth poured out the full story of her marriage, a tale of gradual isolation, escalating control, and ultimately, physical intimidation and abuse. "It started so subtly," she explained, voice stronger now that she was warmer and hydrated. "First, it was comments about my friends being unprofessional or beneath us. Then suggestions about my clothes, my hair. He'd say things like, 'As my wife, you represent me in the community.' The financial control began shortly after the wedding, with Thomas insisting they combine all accounts and have him manage their money since he had more experience. Elizabeth's teaching salary was deposited directly into accounts she couldn't access. "He gives me an allowance for household expenses," she explained. "I have to document every penny with receipts. If I can't account for something, even just a few dollars." Her voice trailed off. The night I cut my hand wasn't the first time he got physical. There were little things before grabbing my arm too hard, blocking doorways so I couldn't leave rooms during arguments. But since the pregnancy, it's gotten worse. He says the hormones make me irrational, that I need more guidance. She pulled up her hospital gown sleeve to reveal fingerprint bruises on her upper arm. Last week, when I called you from the grocery store about the baby shower, he was angry I went without telling him. This happened when I got home. Tears slid down Elizabeth's face. I've been so stupid, Mom. So weak. Not stupid, I said firmly. Never that. You've been systematically manipulated by someone who knows exactly what he's doing. But you're incredibly strong. You were planning to leave. Saving money. Gathering evidence. Elizabeth nodded, wiping her tears. I have recordings, she confessed. On my phone. I started documenting things a few months ago when I realized this wasn't normal, wasn't safe for the baby, and I've kept a diary hidden in my knitting basket. Thomas would never look there. It has dates, details of everything. My heart swelled with pride at my daughter's quiet resistance, her careful planning despite the danger. Those will be important, I told her. But right now, you need to rest. I can't go back there, Mom, Elizabeth whispered, fear creeping back into her voice. He'll never forgive this public embarrassment. It will be so much worse. You're not going back, I promised. Not tonight, not ever. I'm calling Jack. Jack Brennan had been Frank's best friend since college and was now a partner at one of the city's most respected law firms. If anyone could help navigate the legal complexities ahead, it would be Jack. As Elizabeth drifted into an exhausted sleep, I stepped into the hallway to make the call, finding a quiet corner away from the waiting area where Thomas and his parents undoubtedly lingered. Jack answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. It was nearly midnight. Jack, it's Dulce. I'm sorry to call so late, but it's an emergency. It's about Elizabeth. Despite the hour, Jack listened intently as I outlined the situation. His response was immediate and exactly what I needed to hear. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't let Thomas speak to Elizabeth alone, not even for a minute. Don't sign anything he offers you. I'm calling Judge Matthews on my way. We'll get an emergency protective order tonight. As I ended the call, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I found Caroline Jackson standing there, arms wrapped around herself, looking nothing like the polished woman from the dinner table. How is she? She asked quietly. Stable, I replied cautiously. The baby too, thankfully. Caroline nodded, glancing over her shoulder toward the waiting room. My parents took Thomas to get coffee. I wanted to speak with you alone. She hesitated, then said, I want to help Elizabeth. I studied her carefully. Why now? You've watched this happening for months. Shame, she answered simply. Fear. Family loyalty misplaced in people who don't deserve it. Her hands twisted together nervously. What I said earlier, about our father, it's all true. I've spent my whole life watching this pattern, first with my mother, now with Elizabeth. Tonight was. I couldn't stay silent anymore. What kind of help are you offering? I asked, still wary. Evidence, Caroline said. Text messages between Thomas and my father discussing how to manage Elizabeth, conversations I've overheard. And, she swallowed hard, photographs of my mother's injuries over the years. She kept them hidden, but I found them as a teenager. That's your mother's private pain, I said gently. Are you sure you want to share that? Caroline's eyes hardened. My mother has chosen to stay. Elizabeth deserves the chance to leave, to protect her child from growing up in that environment. I'll testify if needed. The weight of her offer hung between us, the willingness to publicly break with her family, to expose decades of carefully hidden abuse. Whatever her previous silence, this took extraordinary courage. Thank you, I said simply. Elizabeth's lawyer will be here soon. He'll want to speak with you. Caroline nodded, then tensed as voices approached from the corridor. Thomas and his parents returning. I should go. They can't know we've spoken. She pressed a business card into my hand. My personal number is on the back. Call any time. As she walked away, I tucked the card into my pocket, feeling the first fragile threads of a safety net beginning to form around Elizabeth and her unborn child. The night wasn't over, but for the first time since finding my daughter kneeling in the rain, I felt hope stirring. The hospital corridor buzzed with quiet tension as dawn approached. I hadn't left Elizabeth's bedside except briefly when Jack arrived shortly after midnight. He'd come prepared, his tall frame still commanding even in hastily donned jeans and a rumpled dress shirt, leather briefcase in hand. "Protective orders are being processed," he informed me quietly as we conferred outside Elizabeth's room. Judge Matthews was appalled by the circumstances. "We'll have papers by morning." Thomas had attempted to see Elizabeth 3 times during the night, each time meeting resistance from hospital staff who were now operating under clear instructions that Elizabeth wanted no visitors except me. His frustration had grown increasingly visible, his polished veneer cracking at each refusal. Around 5 in the morning, Elizabeth woke from a fitful sleep. The monitors showed her blood pressure had stabilized, and Dr. Winters had confirmed the baby's heartbeat remained strong and regular. My daughter's face still showed strain, but her eyes had clarity and determination I hadn't seen in months. "I want to check my phone," she said suddenly. "The recordings." I retrieved her purse from the bedside cabinet where the nurses had stored it. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her phone and navigated to a hidden folder. "He doesn't know about these," she explained, voice low. "I told him my phone keeps malfunctioning and restarting, so I had to set up a cloud backup. Really, it's sending everything to a secure account he can't access." My tech-savvy daughter had created her own safety measures. She played a recording from 3 weeks earlier, Thomas's voice cold and cutting as he berated Elizabeth for speaking too long with a former colleague at the grocery store. The audio captured the sound of something shattering, then Elizabeth's frightened apology. "There are dozens like this," she said, stopping the playback, "and pictures of the financial documents showing how he systematically removed my name from everything we owned jointly. Jack needs to hear these," I said. "Are you ready to share them with him?" Elizabeth nodded. "I have to protect my baby. This isn't just about me anymore." Jack returned shortly afterward, accompanied by a social worker named Melanie, who specialized in domestic violence cases. Together, they listened to Elizabeth's account and reviewed the evidence she'd gathered. "This is compelling documentation," Jack said, his expression grim. "You've been very smart about this, Elizabeth." "Not smart enough to avoid the situation entirely," she replied bitterly. "Abuse happens to intelligent, capable people every day," Melanie interjected gently. "The manipulation is gradual and deliberate. Recognizing it and planning your exit takes tremendous courage." As they talked through legal options, I slipped out to find coffee. The waiting room was mercifully empty of Jacksons, though a nurse mentioned they'd finally left around 3, with Thomas vowing to return in the morning with consequences. I was heading back to Elizabeth's room when I encountered Dr. Winters reviewing charts at the nurse's station. "How is she really doing?" I asked quietly. The doctor's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Better than many in her situation. The preeclampsia is responding to treatment, and the hypothermia was mild enough that we don't expect lasting effects. The baby shows no signs of distress now." She hesitated. "Has she decided what she's doing after discharge?" "She's not going back to him, if that's what you're asking," I replied firmly. "Her lawyer is here now, arranging protection." Dr. Winters nodded, satisfied. "Good. We can probably release her tomorrow if her blood pressure remains stable. I'd like her to follow up with her regular obstetrician within 3 days. Her regular doctor is Thomas's golf buddy," I said, remembering this connection with sudden concern. "We'll need someone new. I can recommend several excellent OBs who have experience with high-risk situations like this," Dr. Winters offered, writing names on a prescription pad. "These 3 understand domestic violence protocols and maintain strict privacy measures." I thanked her sincerely, tucking the list into my pocket alongside Caroline's card. More threads in our growing safety net. Returning to Elizabeth's room, I found Jack on the phone while Melanie helped my daughter complete paperwork. The energy had shifted, plans were being set in motion, decisions made. Dulce, Jack said, ending his call. We need to act quickly. The protective order has been granted, but Thomas will be served this morning. Once that happens, he'll likely attempt to secure the house and Elizabeth's belongings. What do we do? I asked, immediately alert. I've arranged for a security team to accompany us to the house now, while Thomas is still away. We can gather Elizabeth's essential items and documentation. He looked at Elizabeth. Is there anything especially important we should retrieve? My laptop has backups of the financial records, she said immediately. It's password protected. And my prenatal medical files are in the desk drawer. The diary is inside a hollow book in my knitting basket, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And, she hesitated, the baby things I've collected. They're in the nursery closet in a cedar chest. We'll get everything, I promised. The plan came together quickly. Jack would accompany me to the house with his security team, former police officers who now worked for his firm. Melanie would stay with Elizabeth, who would officially be discharged to my home once Dr. Winters approved. As I prepared to leave, Elizabeth gripped my hand. Be careful, she whispered. Thomas has cameras. He'll know the moment anyone approaches the house. That's why we're doing this legally, and with witnesses, Jack assured her. The protective order gives us the right to retrieve your personal belongings. The morning sun was just breaking through the clouds as we arrived at Elizabeth's house, myself, Jack, and two security professionals named Steve and Marcus. The storm had passed, leaving puddles on the driveway and lawn. I could still see the indentation in the garden where Elizabeth had knelt. Using Elizabeth's key, we entered the silent house. Everything looked exactly as we'd left it the night before, wine glasses still on the table, dinner plates abandoned. We moved efficiently, following Elizabeth's directions to collect her most important belongings. In the master bedroom, I quickly gathered clothing, toiletries, and personal items, while Jack secured the laptop and documents from the office. The security team kept watch, communicating via earpieces about any approaching vehicles. The nursery stopped me in my tracks. Painted a soft yellow with white furniture, it held all of Elizabeth's hopes for motherhood. The cedar chest contained handmade blankets, tiny clothes, a stuffed rabbit she'd had since childhood. I packed everything with care, tears threatening. We had nearly finished when Steve's voice came urgently through the radio. Vehicle approaching fast. Black Mercedes. Definitely Jackson. We're within our rights to be here, Jack reminded us calmly. Let's continue loading, but be prepared for confrontation. Moments later, tires screeched in the driveway, followed by a car door slamming. Thomas burst through the front door, rage distorting his handsome features when he saw us in his foyer with boxes and suitcases. What the hell is this? He demanded, advancing toward me. Marcus stepped smoothly between us. Sir, we're here legally under the authorization of a protective order issued by Judge Matthews this morning. Protective order? Thomas looked genuinely shocked, as though the consequences of his actions were inconceivable to him. What are you talking about? Jack handed him an official document. This restraining order prohibits you from contacting Elizabeth or approaching within 500 feet of her. It grants her the right to retrieve personal belongings from the residence. Thomas scanned the document, his face darkening. This is ridiculous. Based on lies and exaggerations from an hysterical pregnant woman and her interfering mother. The evidence suggests otherwise, Jack replied evenly, including medical documentation from last night, multiple witnesses, and Elizabeth's own recordings of your abuse. Recordings? Thomas paled slightly before his expression hardened. You've all made a serious mistake. Do you know who my family is in this community? What we can do? Threats only strengthen our case, Mr. Jackson, Jack noted calmly. I suggest you contact your own attorney and proceed through proper legal channels. Thomas turned to me, voice lowered menacingly. You think you've won? This is just beginning. Elizabeth has nothing without me, no money, no property, nothing. I've made sure of that. She has her freedom, I replied steadily. And her child. And a mother who won't let you hurt her again. His laugh was ugly. We'll see how long your maternal protection lasts against my family's resources. I want my child, The court will determine appropriate custody arrangements, Jack interjected. For now, this order includes temporary custody for Elizabeth. Thomas's phone rang, interrupting his next threat. He checked the screen and answered immediately. Yes, father? His expression shifted as he listened. What do you mean Caroline's involved? That's impossible. While Thomas was distracted, we finished loading the vehicles. Jack motioned that it was time to leave. This isn't over, Thomas called after us as we walked out. Not by a long shot, but something in his voice had changed, less confident, more desperate. Whatever news he'd received from his father had shaken him. As we drove away, Jack explained. Caroline contacted me early this morning. She's provided a sworn affidavit about the pattern of abuse in the Jackson family, including specific instances she witnessed between Thomas and Elizabeth. Will that be enough? I asked, watching Elizabeth's house recede in the side mirror. Combined with Elizabeth's evidence, the medical reports, and your testimony, it creates a compelling case. Jack's expression was grimly satisfied. Thomas is right about one thing, this isn't over. But he's wrong about who's going to win. By afternoon, Elizabeth had been discharged from the hospital and settled into my guest room, which I'd hastily converted into a comfortable space for her. The cedar chest sat at the foot of the bed, and familiar pictures decorated the nightstand, small touches of normalcy in a world turned upside down. How are you feeling? I asked, bringing her tea and the prenatal vitamins Dr. Winters had prescribed. Strangely relieved, Elizabeth admitted, hands resting on her belly where the baby kicked actively. Scared about what comes next, but not terrified anymore. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, I assured her, sitting beside her on the bed. You're not alone in this, sweetheart. Not anymore. Her phone chimed with a text message. Elizabeth checked it cautiously, then smiled slightly. It's Caroline. She wants to know if she can visit tomorrow. She looked up uncertainly. What do you think? I remembered Caroline's courage in speaking up, her willingness to break family ranks. I think having allies is important right now, especially unexpected ones. Elizabeth nodded, typing a response. Another support thread woven into the safety net we were building around her and her unborn child. Not perfect protection, not yet, but growing stronger by the hour. The road ahead would be challenging legal battles, financial concerns, the emotional recovery from trauma, and the imminent birth of a baby. But looking at my daughter's face, seeing determination replacing fear, I knew we had already won the most important victory. Elizabeth was free. The rest we would face together, one day at a time. 1 month later, the late July heat shimmered over my backyard, where colorful paper lanterns and streamers created a festive atmosphere under the maple trees. Folding tables covered in blue cloths held platters of food, a 2-tier cake decorated with yellow ducks, and a pile of cheerfully wrapped gifts. This wasn't the lavish baby shower Thomas's office had planned, it was something far more meaningful. Elizabeth sat in a cushioned chair in the shade, her face glowing with 8.5 months pregnant radiance as she greeted each guest. Several of her former teaching colleagues had come, women who had gradually been pushed out of her life under Thomas's influence. Her college roommate, Jenny, had driven 6 hours to be here. My book club friends bustled about, refilling lemonade pitchers and arranging gifts. And sitting beside Elizabeth, helping her record who brought which present, was Caroline. The transformation in both women over the past month had been remarkable to witness. Elizabeth had grown stronger daily, reclaiming her independence piece by piece. Caroline had broken completely with her family, moving into an apartment across town, and starting therapy to address the patterns she'd witnessed throughout her life. Need anything, sweetheart? I asked, stopping to adjust the umbrella shading Elizabeth from the sundae. I'm perfect, Mom, she replied, and the peaceful certainty in her voice confirmed it was true. The past month had been challenging in many ways. Thomas had initially fought the restraining order, bringing in high-powered attorneys to contest everything. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Elizabeth's recordings, the medical documentation from that night, Caroline's testimony, and the financial records showing his systematic financial abuse all created an irrefutable pattern. Judge Matthews, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, had made her position clear at the first hearing. Mr. Jackson, this court takes a very dim view of the behavior documented here. The temporary orders will remain in place pending final resolution. Thomas's attempts to claim Elizabeth was mentally unstable due to pregnancy hormones backfired spectacularly when her former colleagues testified about the changes they'd observed in her after marriage changes consistent with abuse, not mental illness. The divorce proceedings were still ongoing, but Jack had proven his reputation was well earned. He'd already secured court orders unfreezing assets Thomas had hidden, ensuring Elizabeth had financial support during the pregnancy. The house remained a contested asset, but Elizabeth had no desire to return there anyway. "Mom!" Elizabeth called, drawing me back to the present celebration. "Jenny's asking about the nursery. Can we show her?" I helped Elizabeth from her chair, supporting her as we made our way inside. The room across from mine had been transformed in recent weeks. The yellow paint from Elizabeth's nursery had been recreated here, the furniture arranged to catch morning sunlight. Elizabeth's handmade mobile of felt stars hung above the crib, and bookshelves stood ready with children's classics. "It's beautiful!" Jenny exclaimed, touching the soft blankets folded at the foot of the crib, the ones Elizabeth had rescued from the cedar chest. "When are you due again?" "3 more weeks," Elizabeth replied, one hand automatically cradling her enormous belly. "Though Dr. Ramirez says it could be sooner. The baby's already dropped." Dr. Ramirez was one of the specialists. Dr. Winters had recommended a compassionate obstetrician who understood Elizabeth's situation and had taken extra precautions to secure her medical information. As Jenny admired the nursery details, I watched my daughter sway slightly, humming as she adjusted a picture frame on the wall. The shadows that had haunted her eyes for so long had finally lifted. She was still healing. The emotional recovery would take far longer than the physical, but she was herself again, or perhaps a stronger version of the woman she'd always been. Back outside, the party continued with games and food. Caroline had just organized a guessing game about the baby's birth weight when we noticed a sleek black car pulling up at the curb. Elizabeth tensed immediately, her hand finding mine. "It's okay," I assured her, watching the car. "We have 15 people here, including Jack's associate Martin. Martin, a former prosecutor, now working with Jack's firm, had been assigned to Elizabeth's case and was currently manning the grill, spatula in hand, but eyes alert. The car door opened, and a slender woman with expertly styled silver hair emerged. Margaret Jackson, Thomas's mother. She stood by the vehicle for a long moment, smoothing her immaculate linen dress before approaching the yard gate with hesitant steps. Caroline spotted her mother and froze mid-sentence. The entire party seemed to hold its breath as Margaret stopped at the gate, not entering without invitation. "I'll handle this," I murmured to Elizabeth, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze before walking across the lawn. "Margaret," I acknowledged, stopping on my side of the gate. "This is unexpected." Up close, she looked older than at our last encounter, fine lines visible beneath her perfect makeup. "Dulce," she replied with a slight nod. "I was hoping to speak with Elizabeth." "You understand there's a restraining order against Thomas," I said, not unkindly but firmly. "If you're here on his behalf—" "I'm not," she interrupted, her composure slipping slightly. "He doesn't know I'm here. William doesn't either." I studied her carefully, noting the absence of her usual confident authority. "What do you want, Margaret?" She opened her designer handbag and removed a small wrapped package. "I brought something for the baby, and—" She hesitated, an apology. "For my part in what happened." Before I could respond, Caroline appeared at my side. "Mother," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Why are you really here?" Margaret's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Caroline, I've missed you." She straightened, visibly gathering herself. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night. About patterns. About choices. And Thomas?" Caroline pressed. "Are you still defending him?" "Thomas is struggling," Margaret admitted. William maintains it's all a misunderstanding, that Elizabeth is being manipulated by her mother and overzealous social workers. She shook her head slightly. I used to believe that narrative too. It was easier. What changed? I asked. Margaret looked past us to where Elizabeth sat watching our interaction, surrounded by protective friends. I found Caroline's childhood journals last week while cleaning. Her observations about our family, about how William treated me. Things I thought I'd hidden so well. Her voice dropped. Children always know, don't they? Even when we think we're protecting them. Caroline's expression softened slightly. Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness, Margaret continued. Just a chance to do better with the next generation. She held out the package again. May I give this to Elizabeth myself? Caroline and I exchanged glances, a silent conference. Finally, I nodded. It's Elizabeth's decision, but I won't stop you from asking. I led Margaret across the yard, aware of the curious glances from party guests. Elizabeth straightened in her chair as we approached, her expression guarded but not fearful. Elizabeth, Margaret said formally. Thank you for seeing me. Mrs. Jackson, Elizabeth acknowledged. Please, Margaret, she corrected gently. I think we're beyond formalities. She held out the small package. This is for the baby, and I wanted to tell you in person that I'm sorry. What happened to you and our family was wrong, and I failed to protect you. Elizabeth accepted the package cautiously but didn't open it. Thank you for saying that. It matters. Margaret nodded, understanding the limited acceptance being offered. There's something else, she added, her voice lowered. Thomas has agreed to mediation for the divorce settlement. William doesn't know yet, but Thomas is. He's beginning to accept that this isn't going away. The news was unexpected. Thomas had been fighting every aspect of the divorce fiercely. What changed his mind? I asked. The corporate board, Margaret explained. Several major clients expressed concerns about the allegations. The publicity has been problematic for business. Of course, Thomas's reputation, the thing he valued above all else, was suffering. His surrender wasn't about recognizing his wrongs but protecting his image. Still, if it meant Elizabeth could finalize the divorce more quickly and with less trauma, it was welcome news. Will you stay for some cake? Elizabeth asked Margaret, surprising us all. A tentative olive branch, not full reconciliation, but a small opening. Margaret's carefully controlled expression softened with genuine emotion. I'd like that very much. The tension gradually eased as Margaret was integrated into the edges of the gathering. She didn't stay long, just enough to share a piece of cake and speak briefly with Caroline. Before leaving, she approached Elizabeth once more. William and I are going to Europe next month. An extended trip, she said, her meaning clear. She would ensure Thomas had no parental support for continuing his fight against Elizabeth. As Margaret's car pulled away, Elizabeth finally opened the small package. Inside lay an antique silver rattle, clearly a family heirloom. It's lovely, Caroline commented, examining it. That was my grandmother's. I never thought Mother would part with it. Elizabeth rolled the rattle gently in her palm. People can surprise you, I guess. Sometimes in good ways. 3 days later, Elizabeth went into labor 2 weeks ahead of schedule. After 7 hours of determined effort, she gave birth to a healthy 7-pound baby girl with a powerful set of lungs and a full head of dark hair. She's perfect, I whispered, counting tiny fingers as Elizabeth held her daughter for the first time. Hope, Elizabeth said decisively. Her name is Hope Montgomery. She had chosen to reclaim her maiden name in the divorce, and her daughter would carry it too, a clean break from the Jackson legacy. Hope's birth announcement was sent to friends and family, a joyful declaration of new beginnings. Thomas received the legal notification of his daughter's birth through his attorneys, along with the preliminary visitation schedule, supervised visits only, as the court had ordered given the circumstances. He attended the first scheduled visitation at the court-approved facility, uncomfortable in the monitored environment but clearly affected by the sight of his daughter. Elizabeth watched carefully but maintained her composure, determined that Hope would never witness fear or tension from her mother. How was it? I asked afterward as we drove home. Hope sleeping peacefully in her car seat. Strange, Elizabeth admitted. But I did the right thing. Hope deserves to make her own decisions about her father when she's older. I won't poison that relationship, but I won't sacrifice her safety either. Her wisdom and strength continued to amaze me. Every day brought new challenges, financial negotiations, court appearances, the adjustment to motherhood, but Elizabeth faced each one with growing confidence. One evening in late September, with autumn leaves beginning to turn and baby Hope sleeping contentedly in her bassinet, Elizabeth and I sat on the porch swing, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. "I'm thinking of applying for teaching positions for next semester," Elizabeth said, gently pushing the swing with one foot. "Part-time to start." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased. "Jenny mentioned her school has an opening in the kindergarten department." Elizabeth nodded. "She told me. I have an interview next week." She turned to face me, taking my hand. "Mom, I need to say something important." "What is it, sweetheart?" "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing up that night, for saying those words, 'This ends right here tonight,' for believing me and fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Her eyes filled with tears. "You saved us both." I pulled her close, careful not to wake Hope. "You were already saving yourself, Elizabeth. You were gathering evidence, making plans. You just needed backup. Still, I'll never forget seeing you at that door, soaking wet but looking like the strongest person in the world." "That's what mothers do," I said softly. "We show up. We stand up. We don't back down when our children are in danger." I stroked her hair, remembering the terrified young woman kneeling in the rain just months ago. "But the real strength has been yours, every day since." Hope stirred in her bassinet, making the tiny mewling sounds that preceded waking. Elizabeth reached for her daughter automatically, lifting her with practiced ease. "Hello, beautiful girl," she murmured, kissing Hope's downy head. "Did you have sweet dreams?" Watching them together, I felt profound gratitude wash over me. The cycle of control and abuse that had threatened to claim my daughter had been broken. Hope would grow up with a mother who understood her own worth, who would teach her daughter to recognize red flags and value herself above any relationship. The road hadn't been easy, and challenges remained. The divorce wasn't final. Financial settlements were still being negotiated, and Thomas continued to press for expanded visitation rights. But the fundamental victory had already been won. Elizabeth was free, Hope was safe, and together we had created a foundation of love and support that no outside force could shake. As the autumn breeze stirred the wind chimes, I watched my daughter nursing her baby, her face serene with quiet confidence. Some nights I still woke with the image of Elizabeth kneeling in the rain, but those nightmares were gradually being replaced by this reality, mother and daughter bathed in golden evening light, safe and whole, and looking toward the future with hope. What would you do if you saw someone you love being mistreated? Would you have the courage to intervene, to say, "This ends right here tonight"? Sometimes the hardest part is recognizing when something is truly wrong, when family business becomes abuse. I hope sharing our story helps someone else find their voice, their courage to act. If this resonated with you, please like, comment, subscribe, and share to help others who might be suffering in silence. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself or someone you love.